In April last year, 3 major South African news outlets, The Sunday Times, The Citizen, and Biz News, published stories about Israel written by journalists who had just been there. But for many South Africans, there was something about the editorial approaches in each of the reports that seemed off. What they weren't being told was that the trips had been sponsored by the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, the SAJBD, an organization with close ties to Israel. That funding may never have come to light had it not been for Hassen Lorgat, an activist who connected the dots.
When I heard originally that the Sunday Times had undeclared a trip to Israel, I looked through the article and saw whom did they interview. Victims of the concert where the attacks took place, one person in the West Bank representing Fatah, not actually in the Gaza Strip, former generals. So I started following each of the newspapers to see whether these names were repeated. I then found, the Citizen interviewed the same people. Then I went and I found in Biz News they'd interviewed the same people. Then I wrote to them to say, listen guys, this is rather strange. You all interviewed the same people. So were you all there together? And if you were there, who paid for you? And then receiving some replies which appear to hide some of these answers, I thought it was best to lodge a formal complaint with the Press Council of South Africa.
The Press Council upheld Lorgat's complaint and called the failure to disclose the sponsorship a serious breach. But it stopped short at upholding the second part of Lorgat's complaint, that the omission was deliberate. And when he repeated that assertion on air,
what I've tried to show is this is a conspiracy, that they worked in collusion.
The editor of the Sunday Times, Makhudu Sefara, called in with his side of the story.
I've never spoken to a Citizen. I don't even know the people at Biz News. I don't even have a business with them, anything that has to do with Palestine and Israel.
When the editor of the Sunday Times was asked by Chris Vick, why is it that you did not disclose this? He said, Msomi, the writer,
he forgot to put the thing at the bottom of the piece.
Sorry?
Says, let me just finish.
He forgot. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Yeah.
all these guys, the Citizen people, all of them have over 100 years high-level journalistic experience. How can they miss the 101 of journalism, that you have to declare your funding? How can they miss it? How can you say we forgot?
It's a valid question, and one that I wanted to put directly to Sefara, the Sunday Times editor, at their newsroom in Johannesburg. Can you see how suspicious that looks? That not one, not two, but 3 news organizations all failed to disclose that their news-gathering trips had been funded.
Look, I can't speak on behalf of the other media houses. I don't know what happened in those media houses. I can speak to you about the internal processes here at the Sunday Times. He needed to put the line at the bottom of the story. He didn't put it. We, as the editors, we should have seen it. We didn't. I know that for Hassan, it's some conspiracy theory that, these media houses are in cahoots with Israel, but that's a genuine human error.
So, were there any sort of conditions or expectations attached to the funding, any whatsoever?
The communication within the company is that where anyone goes on a trip, the condition is that there's no promise that is made. So you can go to a trip, and if you think there's a story, you submit it to your editors, and the editors make a call about whether or not there's this meets with the standards for publication. In this particular case, they didn't speak to me. They spoke to Mr. Msomi, who's a very credible, experienced journalist, and he came back. He wrote what, in my view, is a balanced story. It's a story that shows the pain visited upon people of Israel on October 7, but that same story talks about the pain visited on the people of Palestine and Gaza. And the piece was aptly titled Two Sides of a Tragedy.
Only it isn't really 2 sides of a tragedy. Palestinians are unable to pay journalists to go to Gaza, where Israel continues to lock out the international media and tell their side of the story. The Israelis, on the other hand, have been doing it for years, typically with journalists and influencers from the West, but since October 7th and the waning of international support, their focus has shifted to Africa. Alongside South Africa, Israel has sponsored delegations from Rwanda, Cameroon, Morocco, and then in November last year there was Ethiopia, where at least 20 media workers went to Israel on funded trips. Ethiopia is a Christian majority country with deep religious ties to Israel, a tightly controlled media, and, importantly, a recent history of journalists echoing state narratives during its own brutal war, where mass atrocities were carried out in the Tigray region.
When you look at some of these organizations that were invited, they were some of the most genocidal news outlets when it came to the 2020 Tigray war and genocide. And so one would surmise that they weren't going to have any kind of critical coverage or criticism of any sort from these so-called journalists, I'll say, and so then they were going to just parrot their propaganda.
Images posted on their social media feeds show that many of the Ethiopian journalists visited Christian heritage sites. They were given access to politicians and taken on tours of Israeli newsrooms. And in all the reports that we reviewed, there was one thing in common. They all lacked a Palestinian perspective.
They talked about the hostages, they talked about October 7th, this one documentary. Almost more than half of it was this one individual who was at the festival on October 7th talking about in excruciating details about what was happening. They did not speak to a single Palestinian person. They would go to up to the fences of Gaza and then say,
ደስታዋን ብቻ ሳይሆን ሀዘንም ያለባት ወይም ደግሞ እንደ ሰው ልጅ ልብ የሚነኩ ታሪኮችን የሰማንበትም ጊዜ ነበር.
It was just completely whitewashing genocide, completely one-sided narrative, completely erasing Palestinians as if they don't exist.
We contacted several of the Ethiopian journalists who traveled to Israel last year to give them an opportunity to respond to the allegation that they were whitewashing a genocide. They either ignored the request or declined to comment, as did members of the next delegation that went to Israel from Kenya. Only they weren't journalists. They were a group of mostly evangelical Kenyan social media influencers who seemed all too happy for the opportunity to produce content from the Holy Land.
So you can understand why Israel would come to a country like Kenya, which has a majority Christian population. And the influencers who went to Israel were all well-known online born-again Christians who profess their faith loudly, create Christian content, Christian music, and so on. So these groups of people would be best suited to go to Israel because part of the narrative around Israel is that this is where Jesus was born, Jesus died. So Israel utilized it to draw in people, to make them go and sanitize the image of the country.
I'm looking at where Jesus was buried.
Finding allies in the media while your country stands accused of genocide requires every tool at your disposal. And Israel appears to have learned that faith can be more powerful than persuasion. When journalists and influencers view Israel through a religious prism, rather than as a state accountable for its actions, it can deflect everything else, including Palestinians, whose story is lost in a curated tour of the Holy Land.
Religion is what absolves Israel from whatever crimes it may be committing because to many people it is a holy land first and a state after. So there is this demarcation of understanding in terms of how Israel is viewed. For Christians, the fact that Israel is committing atrocities is irrelevant. Israel for them is the birthplace of Jesus and they therefore support Israel 100%.
Christian Zionism remains one of their critical weapons. So they tie it so close to the faith, to the historic Israel, not this one that is doing what it does, so that it can make this a clear fight between Western civilization versus Islamic terrorism. That is their strategy. There is money that is changing hands, and this investment is long-term, and this is what we have to watch for.
Thanks for watching. Leave us a like or a comment to let us know what you thought about anything we covered this week. The links to our social media and our newsletter are in the description. That's where you can follow us for updates from the show.